Since the beginning of time, mankind has striven to double and redouble his powers.
A mysterious machine has appeared in homes across America.
Alright, baby.
The 32X, one of retro gaming's favourite whipping boys, the laughingstock of Sega's history. Released in November 1994 as an add-on for the aging Sega Megadrive, it was pitched as an alternative upgrade path for the thriftier gamer. Next-gen hardware at a far more affordable price than the Saturn or PlayStation. But despite Sega's altruistic pitch and their insistence that the add-on would be supported alongside its bigger brother, the reality behind this system's creation is much more cynical. Sega were worried about the potential market impact of the Atari Jaguar and had some doubts about whether or not their big moneymaker, the Saturn, would make it to market by the end of 1994. It was clear to everyone which way the winds were blowing. The 32X was a dead end, a quick cash grab between generations made in a rush to address internal concerns that weren't really the consumer's problem. Gamers of the time weren't completely stupid. They knew exactly what was going on here and rightly gave the 32X a pass. Even the most die-hard Sega heads opted to wait until the Saturn's Western release or to see what Sony's PlayStation had to offer instead of picking one up. And because of this lack of sales, all the publishers who had projects in development for it had cancelled these by spring 1995, taking promised releases like Darkstalkers, Alien vs Predator and Rayman away from Sega's already weak lineup. Drastic liquidation price cuts that landed the system in the bargain bin then came during the summer of that year, and by early 1996 the 32X was discontinued entirely with only 40 games to its name. But enough about the history, let's look at the system itself. Beneath the ugly, mushroom-shaped veneer lies some very interesting hardware indeed. Anything rendered by the 32X could either be overlaid or underlaid between graphics generated by the Megadrive hardware, and the aim was that the two would work in tandem. You can often see this effect in action if you forget to plug the link cable between the Megadrive AV out and the 32X. What you're seeing on screen here is Amazing Spider-Man Web of Fire, but without any of the add-ons graphics on screen. Unfortunately, this idea never reached its full potential, as due to the rushed release schedule, many developers opted to keep technical design of their games as conservative as possible, leaving a lot of the 32X hardware unused in most games. So throughout the years, the 32X has been derided by every retro gamer and their mother, but is it really correct to follow the herd without hooking the system up and taking a look myself? Is this ugly duckling of gaming history secretly a beautiful swan that we're all ignoring? Are there hidden gems lurking in the library for this console? Can I really justify this thing with the Mega CD and the Mega Drive attached requiring 3 separate power supplies? Well, let's take a look and see exactly what this maligned mushroom-shaped machine has to offer. First off, let's take a look at Sega's own Virtua Racing Deluxe, one of the games that came with the system at launch. For those unaware, Virtua Racing is a racer released to arcades in 1992, and plays sort of like the forefather of Daytona USA. Beat the clock to the next checkpoint or game over and try to complete a few laps of the course in first place or as close to it as you can get. While it's a little shallow and simple by today's standards, handling the car is a joy and the flat polygon graphics give it a really pleasant vibe. Though pop-in is an issue on all versions of the game up until the recent Switch port, driving just feels nice and there's a lot of challenge in making sure you don't bump into things, even though there's no real reaction from the game when you do, aside from either playing an animation or setting you back in the middle of the track, and all the courses are enjoyable. Maybe not the most exciting things in the world, but definitely something that makes me smile. This is the kind of game that almost makes you believe Sega's hype about the 32X being a viable upgrade path for a cheaper price. This blows the standard Mega Drive version out of the water with its more varied color palette and smoother frame rate, and while it doesn't quite match the Saturn version in that aspect, the fact that it has 2 cars and 2 extra courses that haven't shown up in any of the later ports and remain exclusive to this day definitely makes the case of its value proposition. All in all, this is a surprisingly good way to start off the library of such a despised console. If Sega could keep this up, then perhaps I could say this system is worth picking up, but, well, things don't go well from here. Next up, we have id Software's Doom, a launch title for the system and the first ever home console port of this iconic first-person shooter. This one gets a bad rap for a number of reasons, the most obvious criticism being the music. Right from the get-go, At Doom's Gate sounds like it's being played via armpit farts, and unfortunately this holds true for the entire soundtrack. These thin arrangements are made even worse by shoddy instrumentation, and it doesn't use the 32X sound hardware at all. But there's more to criticize here. I realise various cutbacks and compromises would have to be made in order for this to exist, but Doom 32X only has 17 levels, a massive cut from the DOS release's 27. While the first and second episodes are mostly here, even if entire sections are cut from the maps, the third episode, Inferno, is entirely absent from this port. And as if that's not bad enough, there's no cyber demons, no spider masterminds, no invisible enemies, and no BFG 9000. Enemy sprites are billboarded to always face the player, likely due to technical limitations, and since there's no way to turn while the strafe button is held down, that means encounters with large groups of demons feel a lot more difficult and cumbersome than they normally would be. That would be sluggish on its own, but on top of that, the frame rate is relatively choppy and the game doesn't even run full screen. But it's still Doom. Doom is a good game, and I had a good time playing it, even on the 32X. In fact, it prompted me to finally try and complete all the episodes on PC, something I've never actually done before. And this port still performs better than the later 3DO and even Saturn versions, so it's not the worst port out there. Though the Jaguar version has it beat by a long shot, maybe Sega were right to be afraid of that thing. To be honest though, you're pretty spoilt for choice on Doom ports these days, so none of these should really be your preferred way of playing the game in 2019. Now let's take a look at a couple of Sega's arcade ports, December 94's Space Harrier and January 95's Afterburner Complete. Both of these were arcade rail shooters built on Sega's Superscaler hardware and have you flying through the air trying to shoot down any enemies that come your way while avoiding the same fate yourself. Space Harrier is the earlier and crazier of the two, a sci-fi fantasy of a flying man on a quest to free the land of dragons. And I guess free it of woolly mammoths, Easter Island heads, and weird aliens as well. Afterburner sees you piloting a jet fighter through heavy fire, engaging in dogfights with the help of a machine gun and guided missiles. It's probably the more technically impressive of the two, with a far higher number of sprites on screen at any given time and the way the plane tilts and rolls, but I still find Space Harrier more fun personally. While previous ports of these two games were often stuttering messes with jerky motion that couldn't convey depth to save their lives, the 32X ports marked the first time these classics could be represented in a way that did justice to their original arcade counterparts. Granted, there's a slight cut in resolution, and both of these only run at 30 frames per second instead of the proper arcade 60, but given how smooth the sprite scaling is, you'd be hard-pressed to actually notice this difference in gameplay. The chaos, the explosions, all of it is so mesmerizing and fantastic that, trust me, frame rate will be the last thing on your mind. While you don't quite have the analog precision of the joystick from the arcades in these ports, they still control great even with a D-pad, and I never had any issues with not being able to move where I wanted to go. Everything's tight, responsive, and comfortable to use here. If you're itching for your Superscaler fix, it might be more worthwhile to seek out Sega Ages Volume 1 for the Saturn, since that has Outrun included as well, but that would involve swapping out Afterburner for Afterburner 2 as well, and I don't know the Afterburner community's thoughts on which game is better. To me, they're personally very similar. Here's Tempo, released in March 1995 by Red Entertainment. This one's a side-scrolling platformer developed by the team who brought you Bonk on the TurboGrafx 16, and sees the titular grasshopper hero on a journey to save the world of Rhythmia from the evil King Dirge and his army of minions. Or at least I think that's the story. Tempo's stages are referred to as performances, the level select takes place on a studio set, and you're even given a quick makeup check before fighting any bosses, so I'm not sure if there's some sort of meta-narrative going on here or something. Either way, Tempo is fantastic, aesthetically speaking. I really like the urban dance party music video theming, and the music is pretty catchy here too. Tempo himself is a very lively fellow with a ton of very bouncy and fluid animation for the time. While he moves a little slow for my liking, you can double tap a direction to dash. Though this is a bit fast for some of the platforming, and you can never get a happy medium where you're moving quickly enough, but you can also have good control. Tempo can also open his wings and hover down slowly from a jump by pressing the jump button in mid-air. and can take care of foes with both a long-range musical note throw that stuns them, and a short-range kick on top of the ability to jump on their heads. Finding these dance panels will let you summon your butterfly girlfriend Katie, who essentially lets you cheese the entire game as she opens up shortcuts and attacks anything you hit with a note, but she'll end up leaving you if you lose too much health. While tempo doesn't seem too hard from what you see here, it's definitely got a major problem with conveying information to the player. Hitboxes are very vague, and it's difficult to see where tempo, his surroundings, and his enemies start or end. This can be particularly frustrating during the boss fights, of course, and I sometimes even found it hard to tell what's in the background and what's actually a hazard. The level design is often far more convoluted than it needs to be as well, with arrows and pointers constantly shoved in your face because there's no natural way of telling you where it is you need to go. And it doesn't help that the camera is zoomed so far in, too far for you to see what's above or below properly, really. All in all, tempo's a real looker of a game, but the actual process of playing it is too unbalanced for me to recommend. I feel like if this game tried to do a bit less visually and focused more on polishing its gameplay, that it would end up better, but hey, perhaps Super Tempo on the Saturn might fix that if I cover it one day. Oh boy, BC Racers. I've never liked Core Design's Chuck Rock games much, so I wasn't expecting much from this spin-off, but I didn't expect it to be this dreadful. Originally released for the Mega CD in December 1994 before hitting the 32X in June 95, BC Racers sees Chuck Rock, his son, and a bunch of other cavemen characters nobody cares about race bikes around bland, caveman-themed courses. Racers compete in teams of 2, watch out Mario Kart Double Dash, there's a new kart racer in town, with the racer in the sidecar having the ability to club others in the event that they just so happen to be close enough on that particular side. I guess they were going for something like Road Rash, but in practice this just ends up meaning you never get to use it. I'm honestly not sure what the 32X is being used for here. The soundtrack definitely doesn't use it for anything, in fact it barely uses the standard Megadrive sound chip if the lack of sound effects is anything to go by. And the graphics look like the normal stuff you'd find on the Megadrive. There's no evidence that any of the 3D capabilities, sprite scaling kind of stuff, or extra color palette of the 32X is in use here. The performance is just awful as well. The frame rate is choppier than Super Mario Kart, despite the fact this is on a system supposedly way more powerful and came out 4 years later. In fact, Super Mario Kart is a far better game in nearly every single regard. The lack of power-ups in BC Racers means you either spend the entire race at the back with no way of catching up to anyone, or way out in front with absolutely nothing to stop you from dominating the whole course. Turning and control here is just awful too. I feel like I have to start turning about 2 or 3 seconds before I would in any other game just to get around corners. One of the only places this has Nintendo's game beat is in courses, 32 as opposed to just 20. But these layouts are just bland, and you'll be bored before you even hit the 3rd course, I bet. I've heard the Sega CD version of this one is far better, but I don't know, BC Racers is just such a boring game by design. I don't think I'm ever gonna come back to this one. November 1995's Kolibri is probably the most unique 32X game, and one of the final releases as well. Developed by Novatrade and designed by Ed Annunziata, the same creative force behind the Echo the Dolphin series, this fact is made immediately apparent in the game's semi-interactive introduction. Playing as a hummingbird, you'll immediately get flashbacks to Echo's intro as you wander around a lush, colourful landscape. Though you can't talk to any of your fellow hummingbirds like the dolphins could to each other, you'll eventually come across a flower to feed from. Nearby though, a magical crystal grants you some crazy powers, and seizing the opportunity, you swoop into action, ready to enact your ultimate plan to kill all insects with your phenomenal cosmic rays. So, Kolibri is a shmup. Definitely not the most conventional shmup given the open nature of most levels, the presence of puzzles, and the fact that the theme of this game is based in nature rather than science fiction, but a shmup nonetheless. Kolibri can fly in any direction, stop in place, and face either left or right by tapping that direction on the D-pad whenever you aren't shooting. Several different types of shot can be collected and powered up to help you face your bug foes, and sometimes the action can get very intense. But surprisingly, this game can often take a more serene, relaxed tone. The music in particular is mostly atmospheric softer stuff to soothe you rather than hard driving melodies. The graphics are absolutely gorgeous too. This is the best looking game on the 32X by a long shot, a real treat for the eyes with its smooth gradients between colours, the peaceful forest scenery, the low contrast. It's all a very subtle and breathtaking tribute to the most beautiful woodland scenes in nature. You'll have plenty of time to take it all in too, given how there's no HUD to speak of and death only results in you restarting the particular level you were on, so nothing's stopping you from taking your time, being patient and taking it all in. Though Kolibri is a bit repetitive and the gameplay doesn't vary much beyond the first few stages, it's definitely something that most Echo fans would like, and one of the highlights of the 32X library. And unfortunately, that's all we have time for today, but there's far more to go through when it comes to the 32X. So tune in for part 2 soon to see some games like the PAL-exclusive technical marvel Dark Side, fighters like Cosmic Carnage, and even some real weird stuff like Metalhead and Blackthorn. For now though, I've been Alex on Pause Break, and Happy New Year 2020.